Hello, this is Morris Ruddick. We've been talking about Jewish business secrets. In a world where the perception is the reality, with terrorism and corruption poised to challenge honorable opportunity and the innocent, there is a need for safe places. The issue is power and a culture designed to preserve the righteous. Since God has had a people, the struggle of the righteous was never designed as a retreat. Good and evil do not blend. While this conflict has often involved a remnant operating against overwhelming odds, the equalizer in the equation has been God. It is within this context that God has given his people a gift to help them not only to overcome, but to thrive. That gift is community. In late 2004, there occurred a massive earthquake and tsunami in the Indian Ocean that impacted the surrounding nations. The devastation was awful. Nothing was the same for those affected. Parts of Indonesia were in the direct path of the turbulent tsunami. What took place that never was reported by the media is a dramatic illustration of this amazing gift tied to God as the equalizer for communities of his people. We've been talking about Jewish business secrets. We've noted that over the centuries, at the crux of Jewish business success is the model. This is the model that began with the father of the Jewish people, Abraham. Abraham operated a God-centered, entrepreneurial community. God gives a variety of gifts to men. Among the far-reaching of those gifts is the gift of community. While Abraham's community was designed to be self-sustaining, it also evoked the respect of the more dominant societies around them. His community was a safe place. It is written that when they wandered from one nation to another, that God rebuked kings for their sake, saying, "Do not touch my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm." Even Abraham's nephew Lot came under this protection after he had separated himself from the community, with Abraham mounting a rescue mission. It is likewise written that the powerful ruler Abimelech visited Abraham with the commander of his army to make a treaty. The psalmist captures the substance and reality of this conflict while spelling out the criteria for this gift of community to operate. This psalm begins by describing a people who were wandering in the wilderness, aimless and vulnerable. Yet when they cry out to God, the Lord first brings them together in community. The psalmist then notes that it is within community that the longing of their souls will be satisfied. So the first step in this gift of community is the establishment of community. Nevertheless, the psalmist is describing a progression that takes place that reflects the way that people bond together and respond to both God and those around them. These ancient writings then depict a point at which these people, who had been delivered from the dangers of their isolation and given the first steps of forming a community, found themselves dealing with spiritual darkness and the shadow of death. They were bound up in the throes of what had resulted from them becoming self-satisfied and not only ignoring, but rebelling against God. When they finally came to their senses, they sorrowfully cried out to God, who then broke the bondages of their afflictions. The establishment of this gift of community has a standard. That standard conforms to the righteous nature of the one who, as creator, made it possible. It reflects the principles given by Moses generations before that outlined the way that a community of God's people should live, work, and prosper together. Yet, once the community standards began being adhered to, there came another hurdle. It involved those members of the community the psalmist referred to as fools. Fools generally are not those low on the IQ scale, but rather people who deceive and outsmart themselves. They are ones who compromise, digress, who lived in deceit. Because they pollute the spiritual climate of a community, the spiritual attacks against the community manifest with physical afflictions. Some even die as a result. Once again, when this community faced what was happening, they humbled themselves and cried out to the Lord. God's response was to send his word of healing and deliverance. So first the Lord establishes community, then he sets up his standard by which the community operates. Then to ward off the spiritual infiltration of the dark side into the community, he brings about the supernatural with the wisdom needed to maintain not just the standard, but the spiritual balance intended when God's people live in community. There's still another dimension. This particular passage of Jewish writings has been describing a fishing community. It involves those whose means to feed their families and build the community is in mastering the skills of the business of catching and selling fish. Yet such things involve surmounting the challenges of their trade, as well as achieving the dominion over the elements in order to succeed. The story of this ancient community reveals at times the almost overwhelming challenge these fishermen had in subduing the sea in order to survive. It describes a storm they encountered at sea. It portrays a small boat mounting up on huge waves, then crashing down as the waves break. It depicts the instability and uncertainty of being on a small craft as they reel to and fro and stagger like drunken men. I've been in small boats during storms at sea. It can be terrifying, even when you know what you're doing. Yet for those who know their God, crying out to him is the natural response when recognizing that we too often operate in situations that are beyond our control. So it was for these fishermen that they cried out to the Lord in their distress, and he answered. He calmed the storm, and they were able to return to their port with their catch of fish. This segment of this passage deals with how God intervenes. God helps in controlling the elements as the community perseveres to achieve sufficient domination to bring the necessary increase to feed and house the individuals and families of the community. Each of these factors are a part of God's gift of establishing God's gift of community. First establishing community, then setting a righteous standard, and reaching for the supernatural to ward off evil infiltrations, and then providing the dominion necessary to subdue the elements in order to bring increase and blessing to the community. The story behind the Indonesian tsunami is explained by this psalm. This report represents a very apt example of this gift of God of community described by the psalmist. It illustrates the ancient struggle between good and evil, between righteous power and corrupt power that extends into our day. Having set the stage with this portrayal of how maturity in a community should operate, the psalmist goes on to describe the realities that take place in the setting surrounding the community. It says that when wickedness manifests against God's people, that the Lord will turn rivers into wilderness and fruitful land into barrenness. Simultaneously, he will turn wilderness into fertile lands for the sake of the righteous, so that they may sow fields and plant vineyards and yield a fruitful harvest. Yet when God's people are unrighteously oppressed and afflicted, there comes a time when God pours out his wrath upon the oppressors with a result that can be devastating. The result then separates the poor from their oppressors and stops the devouring path of iniquity. The context for what was happening on certain islands in Indonesia was a horrific persecution of Christians by local warlords. There were instances in which churches were boarded up while parishioners in them and then set on fire, killing them all. The brunt of the tsunami hit these very areas of persecution. Uniquely, in a series of reports, the believers were on high ground when the tsunami hit. Some were having picnics, others were there because that is where they had settled. Our Indonesian brethren will tell you that everything changed in terms of the persecution after the tsunami. The move of God within Indonesia since that time has been one of the greatest of any nation on the planet. When those who are known by His name come together in community, a dimension is added which attests to the way Jews have leveraged this gift of community over the centuries. Community is a gift. Operated in the way God intended, sets the stage for a safe place. This gift is also a commitment and a responsibility. With God at the center, it is the group setting, sharing a common purpose that nurtures the diversity of the individual gifts among its members. It is an assembly of God's people operating beyond the ordinary as they enable one another in their respective spheres. It is a light shining in the darkness.